At the close of your delivery driver shift, there's no phrase more dreaded than a single sentence. "Hey Hal, just a sec. I need to take this customer call." Disappointment and irritation washed over me as I turned back to the counter, my shoulders sagging. "Please, tell me you're not serious. I just wrapped up cleaning the pizza place after an 8-hour stint answering phones, operating the register, and delivering orders all over what felt like half the region." The front door was securely locked, and I was about to head to the back room to finish my shift, my thoughts already home with dinner waiting and my fiancée anticipating my arrival, eager to pull me into her arms as soon as I slipped into bed. However, my boss's phone call had temporarily postponed that. I spent a few moments observing him, his large frame silhouetted against the faux brick wall, his attention fully absorbed by the person on the other end of his phone call. His hushed responses and the rhythmic scratching of his pencil on his notepad were the only sounds besides the building's ventilation system, a faint melody of blues or swing music emanating from an old radio in the rear, and the persistent drumming of rain against the front windows. I fidgeted, unable to contain my impatience. He eventually hung up, turning to face me. However, I couldn't let him speak first. "Are you kidding me, Tony? I'm already done for the night. I've cleaned up. Everything is switched off, and we're closed," I stated, gesturing to the clock on the wall, which indicated it was nearly 10 o'clock. Tony's expression soured, and he too pointed a thick finger at the clock. "Come on, Hal, take another glance. We're not officially closed for another 5 minutes. And you recall our motto." He gestured towards the large sign above the counter. "Whether an hour till closing or a minute, if you request it, we deliver." His expression grew more severe. "That's been our guiding principle ever since my father started this place 70 years ago, and it's something we won't be abandoning," he stated. I sighed. "Come on, man. You're really stuck in your ways, you know that?" The man didn't reply, simply turning back to the order he'd written down and resuming his task. He requested 3 pepperonis, mentioning he'd leave a generous tip for the delivery driver, considering the late hour. He then glanced back at me, a mischievous glint in his eye. "I figured," he seemed to say, "you could always use the extra cash. A few extra dollars would be something you'd welcome." A wave of intense heat surged through me, and I fought back the urge to unleash a torrent of insults at his arrogant expression, an outburst I desperately wanted to make. 3 years ago, when my fiancée and I returned to my hometown to assist my ailing mother, finding a job to cover our expenses was an arduous task, akin to searching for a needle within a vast grain silo, not merely a haystack. The town had significantly deteriorated since my departure in the late 2000s, largely because many individuals my age were no longer remaining to support the farms and businesses as had been customary for generations. Over the past 20 years, people had moved away from rural areas and into cities, causing numerous farms to be foreclosed upon and local businesses to either cut back or shut down entirely. With our savings quickly disappearing and Rita's remote job not yet established, I was left with no option but to accept the first available position, cashier and sole delivery person for the last remaining pizza place in town. The saying, "damned if you do, damned if you don't," perfectly sums up the situation. The job barely covered the rent on our tiny apartment above the former hardware store, leaving little room for error. Every extra cent I earned was crucial for us to stay afloat. Tony was well aware of this, and he seemed to relish pushing me to my limits, offering me meager rewards like scraps tossed to a stray dog. I truly despise him for what he's done. I stared at him for a beat longer, then gave a weary sigh. He clearly had the upper hand and understood it. "All right," I muttered, raising my hands in surrender and strolling back across the room to stand beside him. A smug grin spread across his face as he clapped me on the shoulder, tossing me the notepad as he moved past. "Just drop these off, and you can go straight home afterwards. Bring the earnings in with you when you come back tomorrow. I'll even make these 2 myself," he offered, a touch too sweetly. I couldn't help but think sarcastically, but kept my silence. Instead, I focused on the paper, silently reciting the order before glancing at the provided address. A flicker of surprise ran through me. It was an address unfamiliar to me, which, for someone who'd grown up in this region, was quite unusual. For crying out loud, "Where on earth is this place, Tony?" I yelled, watching as he ignited the wood oven, the dough and ingredients already neatly arranged on the metal countertop. He just shrugged. To be honest, Hal, I've never even heard of it. This isn't the first time, though. Remember those wealthy developers who bought up tons of farmland? They've been constructing these subdivisions out here for the past 5 to 10 years, trying to lure people to the area. It's likely someone foolishly purchased it, and that's probably where it ended up. He turned to start making the pizzas, then shouted back over his shoulder. He even provided directions to find it. You can find them on the back. I watched him for a few more seconds, then shrugged. It makes sense, I suppose. 30 minutes later, I rushed out the back door into the downpour. Holding the boxes above my head, I sprinted across the nearly empty parking lot to my car. By the time I arrived, fumbling with the key in the lock, my coat was drenched and my hair stuck to my face. I tossed the pizzas into the passenger seat and quickly slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. Removing my jacket, I tossed it into the back seat, then smoothed my hair and rubbed my arms, a shiver running through me as a clap of thunder echoed through the air. Typical February, I grumbled, reaching for the glove compartment as I inserted the key into the ignition. After a brief search, I retrieved a well-worn map, illuminating the interior with the dome light as I unfolded it, my eyes darting back and forth between it and the provided directions. My finger glided across the paper as I absorbed the initial instructions, which promised a journey out of town and onto the winding back roads. However, its usefulness quickly faded. The map was roughly 3 decades old, displaying only a desolate cul-de-sac where the directions indicated I should turn. Fantastic, I mumbled, tossing the package onto the pizza boxes and sliding into the driver's seat. No GPS to guide me, of course. This is the consequence of driving a vintage Saab 900 from the late 80s. I should have heeded Rita's advice and gotten a TomTom or similar device. Another sigh escaped my lips. There was no use dwelling on it now. As I activated the headlights and wipers, feeling the heater's warmth on my face, I saw Tony securing the back door. He gave me a brief nod before sprinting to his truck. A wave of resentment washed over me as I saw him pull away, knowing he was going to the comfort of his own home, but I shook it off, releasing the parking brake and engaging the gear shift. The car lurched forward, and I took one final glance at the darkened pizzeria, sandwiched between a video store and abandoned storefronts that had been shuttered for years. Those two, the laundromat and it, are the only things preventing this strip mall from becoming a relic, I mused to myself. Making a left turn, I drove down the main road, the last of the darkened storefronts disappearing as I left town behind. Eager to silence the quiet in the car, I struggled with my iPod, which was plugged into a cassette adapter in the car's stereo. Shortly after, the opening chords of the Bates, the lips of Jane Mansfield filled the speakers. With the rhythm of the music guiding my fingers on the steering wheel, I reread the directions. They indicated a couple of turns after leaving town, and after confirming I had sufficient fuel for the round trip, I embarked on what I anticipated would be a brief excursion. However, whether it was my sour disposition or the dismal weather, the drive felt interminable. I continuously scanned my surroundings as I navigated each bend, encountering only fields and woodlands. Time seemed to drag on, and my frustration mounted, amplified by a new worry. I fervently hoped that a group of reckless teenagers hadn't decided to play a prank by ordering pizzas to be delivered to the middle of nowhere. This wouldn't be an unprecedented occurrence. Due to the limited entertainment options available, it had become a recurring amusement for them. On more than one occasion, I'd arrived at an unoccupied house with a pizza order in hand. Despite being the one who initially made the mistake, Tony would consistently direct his frustration at me, sometimes even reducing my wages for a situation beyond my influence. I definitely don't need another one of those, I muttered, turning the radio up as Depeche Mode filled the car, attempting to silence the swirling thoughts in my head. A dark farm structure blurred past on my left, and I eased my foot harder on the accelerator, the speedometer ticking up to 40 as I navigated a curve. The directions said the turn-off should be coming soon. I prepared myself for the disappointing sight of nothing but the yellow dead-end sign, a stark reminder that my journey into the remote countryside had been futile. To my astonishment, and frankly, my relief, I stumbled upon a three-way junction marked by a street sign. I activated my turn signal, easing to a stop and peering at the sign's inscription. Sycamore Street, it read. Releasing a breath I hadn't known I was holding, I turned right onto the street, my spirits lifting as streetlights started to appear regularly, standing sentinel along the roadside. A short while after, as the road descended into a valley, I caught sight of it at last. Wow, Tony was spot on about the subdivision springing up here. I gazed out at endless rows of houses, seemingly stretching into the darkness as far as I could see. Scattered among them were larger structures, undoubtedly stores of some sort. No wonder I'd never heard of this place, I murmured. It's completely self-contained. A sudden wave of bitterness washed over me, this time not aimed at my boss, but unexpectedly at the community itself. I understood that time's relentless progress meant change was inevitable, but the thought of my hometown fading away while a new community sprung up so close, displacing the familiar farms I'd always known and effectively erasing the past, hurt more than I was willing to confess. I shook my head slightly as we drove downhill. Just concentrate on finishing this, Hal. Then you can head home. As the community unfolded before me, a new realization struck. The caller had provided Tony with precise instructions on reaching this location, including the street address and house number. However, they hadn't specified where to go after arriving. A frustrated groan escaped my lips. From my vantage point on the hill, this place resembled a labyrinth, and finding the house would likely consume half the night. The sensation of defeat started to resurface. Not until my gaze fell upon the first structure in the distance did I realize I was getting closer. The gas station, styled to evoke a mid-20th century aesthetic, beckoned me in. A display of oil bottles and cans, catching the glow of the overhead lights, sat proudly in front of the initial pumps. With a sense of gratitude, I pulled in, parking beneath the awning and silencing the engine. I remained in the driver's seat, closing my eyes to the soothing rhythm of raindrops drumming against the metal awning, as another clap of thunder echoed through the valley. Next, I swung the door open and walked out onto the hard, gray surface. The scent of rain and gasoline hit me instantly, a sharp, almost stinging aroma. I shut the door behind me and hurried across to the nearby convenience store, pulling open its door as a distant bell chimed. The drumming of the rain faded as I entered, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady tick of a clock somewhere in the store. Glancing around, I noticed the counter to my right was unoccupied, the register sitting unattended. Snack bags and rows of refrigerators competed for room, with aisles of auto components and liquids. I couldn't suppress a chuckle when I noticed a display of Boone's Farm bottles positioned beside windshield washer fluid, a rather peculiar image popping into my head. I wondered if anyone would accidentally grab the wrong bottle. Turning towards the counter, I saw a bell. I gave it a gentle tap, the sharp, ringing sound reverberating through the store. Silence descended after the echo faded, leaving only the buzzing lights, the hum of the refrigerators, and the rhythmic ticking of the clock. No one emerged from the garage or the restroom tucked away in the back. I tapped my fingers impatiently on the counter, glancing at my watch. 10:45. Come on, man. Where is everyone? I muttered, my frustration growing as I slammed the bell again, this time with more force. The echoing sound lingered, and as it faded, my initial irritation grew into a full-fledged annoyance. After what my watch indicated was a 5-minute wait, I decided to turn around, heading for the entrance and prepare to hunt down the correct address. Is there anything I can assist you with? The unexpected voice startled me, nearly making me leap into the air. I spun around, a surprised grunt involuntarily escaping my mouth. A man stood at the counter, a smile on his face as I struggled to calm my racing pulse. He spoke after a pause. I apologize for the delay. I was in the restroom when you rang the bell, and as you understand, once you answer the call of nature, there's no stopping it. He chuckled, a smile still playing on his lips as he repeated his question. Is there anything I need to help you with? I was momentarily speechless. The way he'd managed to exit the bathroom without me hearing a door creak or the sound of his footsteps on the tiles had nearly given me a fright. He must have the stealth of a Special Forces operative to pull that off. After regaining my composure, I calmly moved back towards the counter, retrieving the directions from my jeans pocket and clearing my throat before speaking. Sure thing, buddy. The pizza place I work at in the neighboring town got an order from your location, but the directions I received only lead me to this point. They provided the street and house number, but with all the roads I saw from the peak of the hill, it's about as helpful as a chocolate teapot. Before I could elaborate, the man erupted in a hearty laugh, shaking his head and slapping the counter with his hand. "Now that's a funny one, kid," he exclaimed. I arched an eyebrow. It wasn't particularly humorous, but I pressed on. "Right, well, I was hoping you could give me some guidance so I can complete this delivery and get going. It's my final drop of the night, and I'm eager to head home." The man appeared to contemplate my words, then nodded, extending his hand for the directions. I passed them to him, stealing a glance out the window as he perused them. The rain seemed to be subsiding. Praise be. I looked back when he clicked his fingers. Ah, indeed, I recall the address. It's a lovely family who just settled in. The Corrigans. He fished out a pen and started scribbling on the paper. "Allow me to jot down the directions. I'm certain they're famished and eager for a meal." I responded vaguely, my mind already strategizing how to account for my tardiness to Rita should she wake up upon my return. As I looked out at the twinkling lights of the initial houses, a thought struck me. "Oh, by the way, I'm curious. When was this established? I didn't catch wind of it back home." He replied, remaining hunched over. "It wasn't that long ago, actually. The developers who established this place already did the same in numerous other rural communities nationwide. They're expanding their reach now, and the newcomers, myself among them, are drawn to these types of locations." He rattled off a list of appealing features: stunning vistas, fresh air perfect for children to play in, and then, after a pause, he confessed, "To be frank, and this is just my take, but the local cuisine here is absolutely incredible." For a second, I just nodded absent-mindedly. But then, as if his words had finally sunk in, a wave of bewilderment washed over me. I looked back up at the top of his head, utterly perplexed. A what? Except for a pizza joint, a sizzler, and a mediocre Italian eatery that inexplicably stayed afloat, the closest restaurant was a grueling 50 miles away. None of those three establishments would be considered to die for. That's for sure. Perhaps he's just being polite, I thought. I dismissed his suggestion as he rose, offering the paper back to me. "Here you are. I'm sure you'll find them straightforward." A wave of relief washed over me as I accepted the directions from him, quickly scanning them before tucking them away and looking back up at him, my lips parting to express my gratitude. It was then that I observed something that caused me a degree of unease. He maintained a constant smile throughout our conversation, something I hadn't initially observed. From the start to the finish of our exchange, that smile never wavered. Even now, the same expression graced his face, his pearly white teeth gleaming under the overhead lights. Moreover, his eyes held the same playful sparkle they had when we first met, as if he knew a secret jest he was determined to keep to himself. A sudden chill ran down my spine, and a wave of unease washed over me as I cautiously made my way towards the door, trying to sound steadier than I actually felt. "Yep, thanks a bunch, man. This is really helpful. Have a great evening." I pivoted and hurried towards the exit, the man's jovial voice echoing one last time behind me as he called out, "You too." I dashed through the doorway, running back into the rain towards my sob. I leaped inside, swiftly shutting the door and instinctively locking it. For a while, I remained seated, attempting to process the encounter. Nothing about it felt even remotely ordinary. A chill ran down my spine as I turned the ignition, casting a last glance at the window as I moved from under the awning's shelter. Instantly, I wished I hadn't. The man was clearly watching me from inside, his face obscured by the rain, but I was positive he was still grinning. "Come on, seriously? I get that not everyone here is like this, but if we have to make more deliveries to this area, I'm steering clear of that spot like it's infected." The only positive outcome of the unsettling meeting was the directions he'd provided. Despite his eerie demeanor, he had been correct. Within 10 minutes, I arrived at the house. Fortunately, the rain had ceased, and as I exited the vehicle, Pizzas in hand, I breathed in the fresh scent of damp grass from the lawns. Distant thunder still rumbled, a fading echo of the departing storm. A wave of relief washed over me, the first since Tony's call, and I couldn't help but let a small smile appear. Considering everything that had transpired tonight, all I had left to do was deliver these, and then I was good to go. As I walked towards the path leading to the house, I took a moment to look around. Then he hesitated for a second. Parked in the driveway was a car I never anticipated finding in this setting. A gleaming green Dodge Coronet, a sedan from the early 1970s, its paint and bodywork flawlessly preserved. I muttered, "Huh," and glanced at the neighboring driveway, anticipating a Mercedes or Lexus. But to my astonishment, I found an early 1980s Land Cruiser, also seemingly in near-showroom condition. Well, I'll admit that came as a surprise. I figured people in a location like this would be driving brand new luxury vehicles, maybe SUVs, not classics from 4 or 5 decades ago. You never know. For the umpteenth time that evening, I shook my head and continued my walk to the front door. I ascended the porch steps, my free hand instinctively gravitating towards the doorbell. A press of my finger sent the chime ringing through the house. I paused, the distant roar of thunder and howling wind filling the air, before pressing the doorbell once more. A woman's voice responded from within. "Hold on a second." Relieved to have received a response, I moved away from the front door and waited. Shortly after, I spotted movement through the frosted glass panels flanking the door. The same voice then spoke from beyond. "Who's there?" I cleared my throat and called out, "Pizza delivery, ma'am. Your order is here." The click of the lock being undone followed, and a moment later, the door swung inward. Across from me stood a woman, just a couple of years my senior. Her brown hair, styled in a ponytail, framed a simple outfit of slacks and a button-up shirt. A friendly smile lit up her face as she saw the pizzas I was carrying. "Of course," she exclaimed, noticing I was without a coat. She gestured invitingly. "Come in, out of this dreadful weather. You don't want to catch a cold." With a grateful smile, I nodded. Then, after wiping my feet on the mat, I entered, and she closed the door behind me. The welcoming warmth of the interior hall eased my tension as the woman moved aside. Just as she was about to speak, a voice called from the depths of the house. "Honey, is that the delivery person?" The woman turned away. "Yes, dear." She then returned to me, pointing to the pizzas in my hands. "My husband will be here shortly to settle the bill. May I take these?" My children were famished, and I'd vowed to feed them before bedtime. Tony had instructed me not to release the deliveries until payment was received, but as I was already inside, I didn't think it was a big deal. I gave them to her, and she offered another warm smile before disappearing down the hallway. By myself, I rubbed my arms, still feeling the lingering chill, and surveyed the room. The hallway exuded a warm, vintage charm. Wood paneling adorned the walls, while a patterned rug covered the floor. Photographs were displayed on the walls, and I moved closer to inspect the ones nearest to me. The first picture featured a radiant woman standing beside a man, undoubtedly her husband, who appeared to be in his early 40s, tall and powerfully built, and sporting a friendly smile. 2 young boys, both with blonde hair, stood before them, also grinning at the camera. A smile tugged at my lips as I gazed at the picture, the joyful family bringing a wave of nostalgia for times when I too posed for photos like that with my own parents. My eyes moved to the subsequent image. The quartet stood on what appeared to be a beach, clad in swimsuits. Shifting my gaze to the third photo, I was just starting to register their position in front of a house when a sudden realization dawned on me. I reclined, my gaze shifting between the first image, then the second, and lastly the third. Initially, the connection between what I was observing eluded me. I scrutinized the 3 photographs once more. A sudden wave of intense coldness swept over me. They all sported the identical smile in every picture. I'm not saying they were just alike. Their smiles were eerily, unnervingly the same, utterly identical. It was impossible. No one can flawlessly recreate the exact same smile or expression twice, not with facial muscles, or even external factors. let alone 4 individuals. What the hell? I breathed, stumbling back, a wave of icy shock washing over me. My thoughts raced, my heart pounding in my chest. Come on, Hal, I told myself, take a breath. You're overreacting. Not every picture has the same smile. You're exhausted. Just finish this and go home. I was almost starting to convince myself, feeling the tension ease, until a noise from behind me shattered the moment. Within the den, upon entering, I hadn't spared a glance for the room's interior, my attention wholly consumed by the woman present. However, as I gradually turned towards the noise's origin, my gaze swept across every detail, my thoughts trailing slowly in its wake. The wallpaper, though appearing fresh, displayed a pattern decidedly out of style. My eyes then fell upon the circular couch and chairs, upholstered in muted reds and greens, with one chair distinctively adorned in plaid. I spotted the emerald carpet, a shag style that brought back a hazy memory of my uncle's removal of his own in the early 2000s. The oddly designed lamps and tables also caught my eye. Next, my gaze drifted to the opposite end of the room. 2 boys, who I'd previously seen in photographs, were sprawled on the floor facing a television. Their backs were to me, and I could only make out the tops of their heads as they engrossed themselves in a video game. This wouldn't have been particularly noteworthy, given that every young child, including my own cousins, enjoys playing games these days, except for 2 specific things. The first was the absence of a flat-screen TV. They were gathered around a massive CRT television, its wooden casing giving it a distinctly vintage feel, reminiscent of an antique Montgomery Ward advertisement. What truly stood out, however, was the absence of a modern gaming console like a PlayStation, Nintendo, or Xbox. I couldn't make out the console from my position, but that didn't matter. The screen's display and the sounds emanating from the speakers were unmistakable. They were playing an Atari. Normally, I wouldn't have given it a second thought. I actually enjoy seeing kids playing classic games, having grown up with them myself. However, with those eerily similar smiles in the pictures, which my mind was desperately trying to explain, the fresh 70s decor, and this, it all added up to a sense of unease, like the final unsettling ingredient in a creepy concoction. Similar to the encounter at the gas station, something about this place just felt off. My instincts were screaming at me. It was then that the 2 boys shifted their gaze to me. I couldn't be sure if they'd noticed me watching them, but I had to stifle a scream at their expressions. Both were fixed on me with matching smiles that were exact replicas of the ones in the photographs I'd studied. A realization struck me, and I understood why the gas station attendant had unsettled me. It wasn't just his constant smiling. It was the unsettling lack of genuineness in his grin. They appeared more like a decorative facade, intended to deceive and create a false feeling of safety. As their intense gaze persisted, a whirlwind of thoughts raced through my mind. Swallowing hard, I managed a weak smile and awkwardly raised my hand in a feeble wave. But they remained motionless, their eyes fixed on me. Goosebumps erupted across my skin, and I instinctively took a step back. Enough was enough. Forget the expense Tony would undoubtedly charge me. I needed to get out of there immediately. Feeling exposed with my eyes off the 2 boys, I shifted my gaze towards the front door. But instead, I was met with 2 beaming faces. Similar to the gas station encounter, I hadn't noticed the woman return down the hallway. She appeared right before me, her husband at her side. A fresh wave of shivers ran through me as I realized he was significantly taller than me, nearly a half foot, which at 6 feet 2 inches wasn't something I was accustomed to. Instinctively, I took a step back, attempting to create some distance between us. An awkward silence descended, broken only by the man's voice. "You'll have to excuse me, young man." I was engrossed in stowing leftovers in the freezer when my wife, as usual, started her routine complaints about my manners. Their laughter, mirroring their smiles, felt as genuine as a painted-on clown grin. For a second, I was speechless, until my mind frantically urged me, "Play along, you fool. If they don't suspect you're wise to their game, you might just get away." I retreated slightly, barely noticeable, and strained to speak in a tone completely opposite to my true emotions. "It's perfectly all right, sir. Truly, my fiancé teases me about the same matter," I said. They both chuckled once more, and a fresh wave of shivers ran through me at the sound. "Good to know I'm not the only one with this problem," he remarked, pulling out his wallet. "So, how much do I owe you?" he inquired. $24.76, sir," I stammered. He extracted the cash, pausing to count it briefly before extending it towards me. "Here you go, son, and a little extra for braving the late hour," he said. On the verge of freedom, I managed to plaster a smile on my face, reaching out to take the money he proffered, stealing a quick look at their expressions as I did, and became motionless. My reaction wasn't one of fear or hesitation. The instant our gazes locked, it was like being hypnotized. The world around me dissolved. I vaguely noticed my arms falling to my sides, my vision swimming, and sounds echoing as if from a distant tunnel. A part of me tried to scream, but I was paralyzed, unable to respond. I stood there, detached, as if I'd exited the realm of space and time. Faintly, a boy's voice drifted to my ears, calling out, "Mom, our stomachs are rumbling. Are we having dinner soon?" A moment later, a woman's voice responded, echoing with the same remoteness as the boy's. "Yes, darling, it's time," she said. I can't explain why, but a single sentence pulled me abruptly back to reality. I jolted awake, surging forward from the dark tunnel I'd been lost in, and found myself back in the hallway. The moment I returned, I desperately clenched my jaw to prevent myself from unleashing a scream. They were all there, just inches from me, each with the same smile plastered on their faces. But there was a chilling change, a detail that has haunted my dreams ever since. Their heads were bowed slightly, and their smiles, once appearing forced and welcoming, now held a terrifying sincerity. Extremely famished, the moment understanding dawned, I was a whirlwind of motion, whirling around and sprinting for the front door. A wave of surprise rippled through the family, their reaction more felt than heard. I knew they'd quickly regain their poise, but I was already yanking open the door, bursting outside and slamming it shut. With a long, powerful stride, I leaped from the porch and took off running towards my car. Before I could even take 3 steps, I halted abruptly. A chill ran through me, freezing my blood in my veins, and I couldn't stop myself from gasping in surprise. I no longer found myself solitary on the street. The entire community was gathered outside, a mix of men, women, children, and teenagers. They stood bathed in the yellow light emanating from their open doorways, some just a short distance from their homes, others venturing closer to the street. Yet, a shared look of terror etched upon each of their faces. The same famished grins mirrored by the family within. Regaining my composure, I sprinted towards my sob. The sound of the front door opening echoed behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to look back. I was certain that even a fleeting glance would ensnare me in the same captivating hold I'd experienced before, and this time, I wouldn't be able to escape. Avoiding all eye contact, I kept my eyes solely on my car. Thankfully, it was unlocked, and I hurriedly flung open the driver's door, diving into the seat and slamming it shut. My fingers, trembling slightly, fumbled with the keys before I jammed them into the ignition. The engine sprang to life with a powerful growl, and as I shifted into first gear, I quickly glanced at the crowd approaching my car. Their smiles hadn't vanished, but their eyes now flickered with a blend of fury and a desperate plea. I accelerated rapidly. The ear-splitting screech of tires echoed as I surged forward, the car hurtling down the street. A jarring impact against the rear of the vehicle sent a shiver through me, causing the back end to swerve dangerously. Grasping for control, I downshifted into third gear and pressed down firmly on the accelerator. The Saab stabilized, and I quickly glanced at the speedometer, noting my already rapid speed of 45 miles per hour. I took the first left turn, desperately trying to remember the route I needed to take to get to my destination. I refused to get lost in this suburban nightmare. Glancing in the rearview mirror as I took another left turn, this time, a scream finally escaped my lips. An increasing number of residents were fleeing their homes, The entire neighborhood seemed to be emptying out. But it wasn't the exodus that had sent me into a panic. It was the expression on the faces pursuing me. And they were gaining ground. I glanced again at my speedometer. I was pushing nearly 50 miles per hour. That's utterly inconceivable, I shouted. As I turned left again, finally reaching the main road, I noticed an 8-year-old girl with pigtails, her expression mirroring the others, a desperate, almost primal grin, racing alongside my vehicle, keeping up with surprising speed. Crawling on all limbs, I downshifted into fourth gear as the speedometer needle surged past 70. Gradually, the other cars started to disappear in my rearview mirror. Nevertheless, I maintained a firm pressure on the accelerator, the engine's roar filling the cabin as the gas station whizzed by on my right. I glanced at it as I sped past. The attendant by the roadside didn't try to stop me as I sped by. He just observed me, his gaze unwavering. I caught a single detail that stood out. His smile was gone, replaced by a blank, emotionless stare like a Halloween mask. And in that instant, one crucial detail I'd ignored throughout my journey hit me with the force of a runaway train. Not one of them had ever spared a blink. That dreadful night feels like a lifetime ago. Almost 2 weeks have passed. I kept my foot hard on the accelerator, not stopping until I reached the safety of town, constantly checking my rearview mirror every few seconds for any sign of pursuit. I sped straight to the sheriff's office, nearly colliding with a row of parking meters as I came to an abrupt stop. I must have appeared frantic, barging in and speaking in a panicked, agitated manner. The sheriff and his deputies were skeptical when I described what happened, but when I showed them the directions I'd kept safe, he dispatched a couple of his deputies in their patrol cars to look into it. An hour passed before they returned, their faces etched with confusion. One of their statements left me speechless. "Sheriff, we've hit a wall. It's a complete dead end. There's nothing beyond this point." The most disheartening aspect wasn't the disbelief surrounding my claims. Despite their attempts to appear unconvinced, I'm certain they held a measure of doubt, for two compelling reasons. Both served as evidence to support my story. Firstly, there was the money. I clutched it tightly in my fist from the moment I took it, not releasing it until I was safely in the car and searching for my keys. Every bill appeared pristine, with one glaring exception. The most recent date printed on any of them was 1984. The second incident involved scratches on the rear quarter panel of my Saab, marks that looked strikingly like claw marks rather than those made by human fingernails. The most agonizing aspect was the certainty that no one would comprehend their experience. This, I believe, is why they discreetly erected cement barriers along that section of road a week and a half later. Their purpose was to prevent others from venturing down that road, to shield anyone else from becoming a victim of whatever or whomever those entities are. I'm certain they remain. But how? Driven by an inexplicable urge, I walked that road the day before the barricades were erected. I can't even explain my own motivation. The reason eludes me. I hoped to find nothing but a dead end, a confirmation of what the deputies had told me. Instead, I was met with the same three-way junction, the same familiar sign, Sycamore Lane. The following day, I resigned from my pizza place job. Tony was furious, blaming me for not generating enough revenue. I simply advised him to contact the sheriff. I'm actively searching for a remote position at the moment. Rita, thankfully, has been a great support, and I have an interview scheduled in a few days. If my mother wasn't here, unwilling to leave the house my father built for her, I would have moved us both out without hesitation. However, we don't appear to be at risk in town at present. Therefore, we've chosen to remain. For the time being, anyway. This is why I'm sharing this now. Primarily, it's a way to release the burden from my mind. Since then, I've been plagued by horrific nightmares, almost nightly. They center around what could have happened if I hadn't broken free from that trance, about what they would have inflicted upon me. Whether you choose to believe me or not is irrelevant. I simply hope this serves as a kind of emotional release, something that might prevent me from waking my fiancée with my terrified cries. However, there's another factor influencing my stance. And whether or not you accept my words, I implore you at the very least, listen to this caution. Because the man from the gas station, or whatever his true nature may have been, said something to me that continues to haunt my thoughts. These developers have a history of establishing similar projects in numerous rural locations nationwide, and they are currently in the process of expanding their operations. That statement, along with what it suggests, frightens me more than almost anything else. Therefore, I implore you, if you ever find yourself isolated and encounter a seemingly hidden community or neighborhood, one you were unaware of existing, populated with elements that give it a timeless quality, resist the urge to explore it. Instead, turn back and leave as quickly as possible, without looking back, as they harbor things, patiently awaiting, or sometimes enticing people into them. Much like an anglerfish uses its bioluminescent lure to draw prey within striking distance. Unlike my situation, your escape might not be guaranteed.